Many children, adults, and young people still know Santa Claus. Many people no longer believe in it, but in earlier times it was completely different.
Zeiten war das ganz anders gewesen.
Santa Claus hasn't been known in our region for that long. It was first mentioned in 1865 that Santa Claus was at someone's home.
Wurde erstmals erwähnt, dass bei jemandem der Weihnachtsmann zu Hause war.
In the past, at Christmas and Christmas Eve, everything was beautifully prepared. In every house, especially on the farm, the living room was heated 2 days beforehand.
Beim Bauern war es jedenfalls so, in der guten Stube wurde der Ofen schon 2 Tage zuvor angeheizt, damit die gute Stube, die das ganze Jahr so...
The living room, which was hardly used all year round, should be nice and warm and cozy. In the corner, the nativity scene with the nativity figures was set up at the house altar.
Die Krippe auf mit den Krippenfiguren.
The children who were dear during Advent were allowed to put a straw in the manger. So the manger became more and more filled with straw, with each straw having a certain color.
In die Krippe reinlegen und so füllte sich die Krippe immer mehr mit Stroh und natürlich jeder Strohhalm war eingefärbt. Jedes Kind hatte eine bestimmte Farbe.
If one color dominated, you would see it later when Santa Claus came. Santa Claus saw this, and the child, who was particularly sweet, didn't have to be afraid of the rod.
Vor der Rute haben,
Because there was either a gift or the rod. Anyone who hadn't tracked felt the rod. Nowadays this is no longer allowed by law, but back then 200 or 150 years ago it was still common practice.
Jahren war das noch gang und gäbe. Und ja, nun war es ja so.
And now it was like this. On Christmas evening we went to church. The nativity play was performed and Christmas carols were sung together. The Christmas sermon was given by the priest. And then, when "O You Happy, O You Blessed" was sung, the bells kept ringing in the background and the service was over. It went home.
Und der Gottesdienst war beendet, es ging nach Hause.
Most of the time there was snow, but there were also times when there was no snow at Christmas. It was a green Christmas.
Grünes Weihnachten.
People went home and now they were expecting Santa Claus.
Die Leute gingen nach Hause und nun erwartete man den Weihnachtsmann.
Some school children who were 10 years old at the time still believed in Santa Claus and were extremely afraid of him.
Ein Weihnachtsmann und hatten mächtige Angst davor.
Because over the months before Christmas, stupid things were done again and again. As a child you always tried to cover up everything, but somehow Santa Claus found out everything.
Irgendwie der Weihnachtsmann, der erfuhr alles.
And when the bell rang outside, it said, "Santa Claus is coming."
Weihnachtsmann kommt.
Back then it wasn't like today that you had a doorbell on your house. In the villages the doors were always open. There was a key in front of the door, but the door was never locked or barricaded. The front door was unlocked day and night, and anyone could come in and out at any time, even strangers, unfortunately.
Und zu jeder Zeit konnte jemand rein und raus, also gar auch Fremde, leider.
And suddenly there was a knock on the front door. Then they said, "Santa Claus is coming." And whoever was a little less afraid went downstairs, opened the door, and now the huge Santa Claus stood there with the sack and the rod and asked to be let in.
Nun stand der gewaltige Weihnachtsmann mit dem Sack und Rute da und bat Einlass.
He was let in and came into the living room. The children, it was still common back then, could sing Christmas poems and carols. So everyone had to recite a Christmas poem, sing a Christmas carol, and only then were the presents given.
Und erst dann gab's die Geschenke.
They were then taken out of the bag. But you don't have to imagine, like these days, that a laptop or something like that was pulled out of Santa's bag. The presents weren't that wrapped either. Everything was really modest. A bag, a horse or a doll.
In Säckchen war da ein Pferd oder eine Puppe.
And above all, the presents were used at Christmas, played at Christmas, and then the presents disappeared again.
Da wurde Weihnachten gespielt und dann verschwanden die Geschenke wieder.
If you were lucky, you got the same gift again the next year, in new clothes, the horse maybe with a bell on it, a little added, newly restored.
Ein bisschen ergänzt, neu restauriert.
But in earlier times, people didn't get new gifts every year. Often there were just little things as additions.
Bloß Kleinigkeiten als Ergänzung.
And of course there were sweets at Christmas, but not in the way you imagine today. You always have to remember, there was no beet sugar in our region until 1850.
Bis zum Jahr 1850 gab es hier noch keinen Rübenzucker in unserer Region.
It only appeared in our region around this time, and beet sugar was quite expensive.
Recht teuer.
Previously there was already cane sugar from overseas, but it wasn't exactly cheap either. Most people couldn't afford the expensive sugar.
Konnten sich den teuren Zucker gar nicht leisten.
At that time, honey was used for sweetening, and honey wasn't exactly cheap either. It was an expensive spice.
Das war ein teures Gewürz.
For example, there were honey candies that were filled with honey, with chocolate somehow, and there was honey inside. These were the first candies available in our region. They've been mentioned a lot, but I haven't eaten one of these yet, nor have I seen one.
Das waren die ersten Bonbons, die es in unserer Region gab. Die wurden oft erwähnt, aber ich habe so ein Ding auch noch nicht gegessen.
All I know is that 150 years ago, in the imperial era, at the beginning of the imperial era around 1870, there were honey sweets for Christmas. And of course it was always important, at Christmas there was usually clothing, new trousers, a new shirt, a new jacket, a new hat.
Neue Hose, ein neues Hemd, eine neue Jacke, eine neue Mütze.
The grandmother, the mother knitted a scarf, knitted gloves. And of course socks. There were always socks at Christmas.
Gab's immer Weihnachten.
And socks were also important back then, because before Santa Claus came, St. Nicholas came on the night of December 6th.
Kam ja am 6. Dezember in der Nacht der Nikolaus.
And nowadays it's still common practice to clean your shoes or boots beforehand and then put them out. And the next day they'll be full of sweets and all sorts of stuff.
Und nächsten Tag ist das dann voll mit Süßigkeiten und allen möglichen Kram.
At that time, people usually put out a sock that they had knitted themselves, and the sock was then filled with apples, dried fruit and little things, like carved toys and so on.
Und Kleinigkeiten, also geschnitzten Spielsachen und so gefüllt.
And then in the morning it was St. Nicholas Day, and everyone brought in their sock and was happy about it.
Hat sich drüber gefreut.
Of course, if you weren't obedient, sometimes there was just a rod in the sock. This is said to have happened often.
Das soll auch oft vorgekommen sein.
Or with poor children who had put out their socks, there was really nothing in them, or almost nothing.
Nichts drinne oder fast nichts.
There was a farmer in Werschwitz who really had a heart for the children in the neighborhood. Even if they sometimes played pranks on them, stole apples, plums or plucked peas from the field.
Auch wenn die dann manchmal Streiche gespielt haben, der Äpfel geklaut haben, der Pflaumen geklaut oder der Erbsen aus dem Feld gemaust hatten.
But he said, he was young once, he also did stupid things, and at Christmas and Advent you should turn a blind eye. And of course all the corns too. And that's what he always did, and he was well received by the neighborhood back then.
Bei der Nachbarschaft gemacht.
Back then it was common for shoes or socks to be placed on the windowsill or in front of the front door.
Gelegt worden, beziehungsweise vor der Haustür gelegt worden.
Then he took a handful of nuts, or apples, or prunes, or dried apple rings, and filled his shoes or socks with them. And of course the children were happy the next day too, and the parents were wondering who the secret donor for these beautiful things was.
Und die Kinder haben sich natürlich am nächsten Tag auch gefreut und die Eltern haben sich gewundert, wer dieser heimliche Spender für diese schönen Sachen war.
And that really took many years.
Viele Jahre gedauert, erst 1911
It was until 1911 that the farmer was seen by a mother by chance.
durch eine Mutti gesehen und das war natürlich dann schnell aller Munde dort.
And of course that was quickly on everyone's lips. Village gossip has always worked well in a village like Werschwitz.
Dass der Bauer Schneider in Bodebulz praktisch seine Nachbarkinder.
And at the service the conversation was that the farmer Schneider in Podebulz always gave his neighbor children plenty of dried fruit and apples, and similar things.